This is Where We Live. I'm John Dankowski. Today we continue our Where We Vote series. We're talking with candidates for governor leading up to the August 10th primary. Today, Republican Tom Foley rejoins us. He's a former ambassador to Ireland. He worked with the Coalition Provisional Authority in Iraq. He also runs his own business, which purchases underperforming companies and tries to turn them around. In a televised debate on NBC Connecticut last night, his rivals for this nomination took on Foley over his business and over news of arrests in the 80s and 90s. He's also embroiled in a legal battle with Lieutenant Governor Mike Fedeli over campaign funding. So there's a lot to talk about. But we want to hear your questions. 860-275-7266. Again, 860-275-7266. Or email wherewelive@wnpr.org. Not just about those issues I just mentioned, but of course about what Tom Foley's vision is for the state of Connecticut. Tom Foley, welcome back to the show.
Good morning, John. Glad to be here.
And, of course, the cameras of CTN, the Connecticut Network, are here. They're taping today's show for future broadcast. There is a new Quinnipiac University poll out today. It shows you've built a very healthy 35-point lead over your closest competitor, Mike Fedeli. It also shows that you're trailing both Democrats in the race by more than 11 points in a general election race. So do you feel good about where you are right now?
Well, I certainly feel very good about where I am in the primary. I think at this point in the general election race, it's really a generic ballot, so it's really reflecting more the fact that there are fewer registered Republicans in the state than registered Democrats. When we get into the general election cycle, that'll tend to even up more. So I feel very good about where I am.
Do you start to differentiate yourself at this point from the Democrats more, seeing as how you have an almost insurmountable lead, it seems, in this Republican primary?
Well, I think what happens at this point is obviously unaffiliated voters are a very important part of the general election race, and they have nothing. They can't participate in primaries, which is just part of the way the election law works in our state. So, at this point, with this much of a lead, I would be hoping to reach out and be communicating with unaffiliated voters who will be critical in the general election race.
And what's the main message you're trying to get across to those unaffiliated voters? You're doing it through ads right now, but what's the big message you're trying to send?
Well, the message is the same for everyone. I think everybody acknowledges that the biggest challenge facing Connecticut are jobs in the economy and reducing government spending. We have a looming $3.5 billion budget deficit in fiscal year 2012, which starts less than a year from now. And there is absolutely no hope of closing that budget deficit without significant reductions in our state spending. So those are the most important messages. I think others include improving our schools, particularly our inner city schools, reducing the tax burden on working families. We have very high, the highest in the country, state and local tax burden on our citizens. So those are the things I plan to be talking about.
And we'll be talking about some of those specific plans later on. And, of course, you can ask your questions, 860-275-7266 of Tom Foley, or email wherewelive@wnpr.org. We saw this Q poll come out today, and you have, as I said, an enormous lead over Mike Fedeli. You had an enormous lead the last time that they polled. Many people are wondering why you filed suit to stop him from getting money from the state's public campaign finance program. A judge just this week has basically said that you will have a chance to get your case heard in this case, but not until after Fedeli essentially gets the chance to spend his public money. So, in essence, you really kind of lost this court battle. Why did you do this?
Well, first of all, I've been very clear from the start that I don't believe that Mike Fedeli should be taking taxpayers' money to finance his campaign for governor. First of all, I don't know how the next governor can lead this state through what we need to go through. I mentioned the need to reduce state spending. When they starts off taking millions of dollars in taxpayer money to pay for bumper stickers and ads and so forth. So I think it's just poor leadership. And he's a man of means. He can certainly go out and raise money the same way I am and supplement his own campaign if he chooses to. I don't understand why he's relying on the citizens' money to pay for his campaign when he could do it himself. We have a perfectly good campaign finance law that exists without using the Citizens Election Program, without using taxpayer dollars to finance your own campaign. It's the system that Governor Rell used last time around. So it's clean. It has a lot of integrity. It's the one I'm using. It's the one he should be using too. I've made that clear.
You said that just again now, and you said it earlier to the newspapers, that Mike Fedeli is a man of means, suggesting he should put in his own money and then also raise money and not rely on public financing. Here's what it sounds like to a lot of people, Tom Foley, is that only rich guys can run for governor.
Well, unfortunately, I think that partly because of the way our campaign finance laws have evolved, it may well be that people who can supplement their own campaigns do have an advantage. And part of the reason is because of the limitations on who can contribute and how much they can contribute. I think actually the system would be better if it were broadened so that more people can contribute and they can contribute more money. But right now, to run a winning campaign in Connecticut for governor is probably an $8 to $10 million endeavor. And under the old campaign finance rules, it was very hard to raise that amount of money with all the restrictions on who can contribute and how much they can contribute. So it does favor people who can support their own campaign. And the CEP really doesn't provide enough money. I don't think either. So I think a lot of well-intentioned people have gotten us into a place where people who can supplement their own campaigns do have an advantage.
But do you see that as a problem? If you're governor, will you try to change that? Because it seems just patently unfair. As you say that, we're sitting here, you're leading in this race. Ned Lamont is leading in a race in which he's not taking public money. And if we go for year after year after year, in a state where we have lots of rich people who can self-finance their campaigns, it seems like that's all we'll ever end up with. Are you going to try to fix that if you become governor?
Well, it's not something that the voters seem to be concerned about. In polling, it doesn't seem to be an issue that people care about that much.
But the legislature passed a bill to try to do something with Governor Rell's approval, and Governor Rell's pretty popular.
Yeah, but you're talking about the CEP.
Yeah.
Yeah, but the CEP isn't solving the problem. It just tilts the playing field in a different direction. It's not an improvement over the old system. I think that what we need to do is take the old system, not use public financing. That's not the answer. And just broaden the old system and raise the limits. The limits haven't been raised for decades. So if people individuals could contribute more under the old system, the limits were higher, and they didn't keep restricting who can contribute. You know, the Second Circuit just came out and said now lobbyists can contribute. The CEP had tried to make it so that lobbyists and their families couldn't contribute to campaigns. It doesn't really make sense, but they keep narrowing who can contribute and how much, and I think that's a mistake. It should be broadened.
So if you broaden how much individuals can give, lobbyists or anyone else, then you're saying that more money from people outside of self-financers can put money into the system, right? Yeah. More money can flow in from other people.
So people who don't have money then have the ability to raise enough money to win.
But raise enough money from other rich people. They raise enough money from other people who can give multi-thousands of dollars. You understand what I'm saying is when you have only people who have means and people who they know who have means, you end up with a system that's tilted toward people in Connecticut who largely can self-finance or who have connections with people who have lots of money. An everyday person in Connecticut who wants to run for office, certainly higher office, doesn't have a shake in the system.
Well, Jody Rell is, as far as I know, not a person of means and isn't from a community where you would suspect that most of her friends are people of means. So, and she got elected twice. So, and John Rowland, same thing, and most of his predecessors, the same thing. So I think the old system worked fine. There's no evidence that the old system wasn't a perfectly clean system. And they talk about, Mike Fidelli last night referred to the CEP as the clean election program. It's not. It's the citizens election program. It's no more clean than the other system we have.
But you mentioned John Rowland. It's certainly not a man of means.
Correct.
He wasn't a man of means, and then when he got into the governor's office, in part what he did was he used government to enrich himself. That's part of the reason why the citizens election program was put in place in the first place.
Well, okay. Well, Nelson Rockefeller, when he was running for president, said one of the advantages of his being a man of means and serving in office is he can't be bought. So, I don't. John, there was never any suggestion that John Rowland gamed or the election law or violated any of the election law. What happened after he was elected is unrelated to the election law. We're talking about the election law right now.
Tom Foley is a Republican. He's running for governor. He's leading in a new Quinnipiac poll by some 35 points over Mike Fidelli, still trailing Democrats Ned Lamont and Dan Malloy in that poll. We'll be talking more about the poll throughout the course of the hour. Obviously more politics, but we want to get to some issues as well with our callers at 860-275-7266. We're going to take a lot of listener phone calls this hour. So let's go first to Sam in South Windsor. Hi, Sam. You're on Where We Live.
Hi, thanks for taking my call. I've got a question for you. So government statistics have shown that marijuana decriminalization would save Connecticut over $10 million per year. It's been shown in neighboring states like Massachusetts not to raise the rate of marijuana use, and it's supported by over 70% of the country. Tom, if you were governor, would you support such a policy, or would you follow Jody Rell's obstructionist lead and pledge to veto any decriminalization bill that comes to your desk?
Yeah, Sam, I'm against decriminalization of marijuana. We have a serious drug problem in Connecticut, as we do across the country, particularly in our inner cities, and I think it has been shown that decriminalizing marijuana it does tend to increase introductory use of other drugs and drug abuse. So we really need to solve the drug abuse problem, particularly in our inner cities, I think, before we talk about liberalizing the laws related to marijuana use.
Other states are looking at what Sam's talking about, though, and when you have a big deficit hole like Connecticut does, is it ever a good idea to take anything that could potentially be a tax revenue source off the table?
Well, I've said very clearly on the campaign trail that the solution to Connecticut's problems is not more revenues. We need to reduce government spending. This came up last night where Oz Griebel was saying he thought that we should introduce tolls on 95. I'm saying absolutely not. We have to get the legislature to stop talking about potential sources of revenue and pare back this government and get it back to a size and a cost that's affordable for the situation we have today in Connecticut.
You just mentioned tolls. One of the reasons Oz Griebel brings up tolls is because Connecticut is a byway for so many truckers and others who are going from New England to New York and back again. We're really this thoroughfare for business and commerce around the state. He says you put in tolls, you're starting to capture some of that revenue at our borders.
Well, again, I think it's changing the subject. The real subject is we need to reduce government spending, and we can leave that conversation for later, but anytime you tax somebody, you run the risk of driving employers and individuals out of the state. And if people are going to be taxed, if truckers, for example, who are transiting the state are going to be taxed, maybe they'll find a way not to come into Connecticut, and then we don't get the business from them stopping for lunch or maybe stopping overnight. So I just think it's bad policy and not something that we ought to consider.
Before I get to a next phone call, we're going to, I guess, be talking about a lot of specifics about where to cut in the budget because you don't want to raise taxes. You're not looking for other revenue sources. Okay, what's one big cut you'd make specifically?
Well, we're not going to get there with one big cut. There's no silver bullet. Everybody knows that. But I think that broad policies targeted toward where we can reduce certainly waste and duplication, not providing services that the state shouldn't be providing and can't afford to provide in some cases, and making sure that the services we are providing, we're providing at the lowest possible cost. And if that means that an outside private service provider can do it less expensively than the state can directly with its own employees, I would feel obligated to our taxpayers to make sure that we're getting the lowest cost of our source of supply. So we also, if we can reduce healthcare costs in Connecticut, we have one of the highest healthcare cost systems in the country. That will affect government spending because a very large part of our budget is Medicaid related, and the healthcare costs for our current state employees and our retirees. So if we can bring down our healthcare costs by 10 or 20%, which some people think is feasible if we could take the healthcare cost reduction provisions that were in the federal healthcare plan initially, but were taken out. But if we could take those and apply them here in Connecticut, which is tort reform, electronic record keeping, wellness programs, et cetera, and bring down healthcare costs, that would be a very significant savings in our budget, many hundreds of millions of dollars.
We'll get to some more specifics on that quickly. I want to get to Dave in Woodstock. Hi, Dave. You're on Where We Live.
Good morning. Thank you for taking my call.
Yeah.
I was wondering, Mr. Foley, if you would support a measure to reduce the number of state mandates for health insurance in our state, which would probably save us immediate 20%.
Well, the legislature puts a lot of mandates on employers and our towns, and I've been very vocal on the campaign trail that the legislature needs to stop overreaching and let the towns and let employers deal with their own relationships with people they employ. So I think all the mandates on towns and employers should be reviewed and determined whether or not the state legislature is statutorily interfering with those relationships. Which ones make sense and which ones don't, I can't say yet. But I know, for example, in the case of towns, that mandatory binding arbitration on teachers' contracts, I think, is an inappropriate interference with towns' relationships with their educational systems and teachers. So I would certainly be in favor of repealing that.
Tom Foley joins us today on Where We Live. It's our Where We Vote series. He's fresh off a debate with his other Republican rivals for the nomination. You can join the conversation, 860-275-7266. You can email us wherewelive@wnpr.org. Or if you're on Twitter, you can tweet us at Where We Live. This is Where We Live. I'm John Dankosky. We're continuing our Where We Vote series, talking with candidates for governor leading up to the August 10th primary, giving you a chance to ask questions of Tom Foley, the Republican who leads the field. He is leading by some 35 points over his nearest competitor, Mike Fedeli, in the latest Quinnipiac University poll, but still trailing Democrats Ned Lamont and Dan Malloy in a general election poll. Again, 860-275-7266. Email wherewelive@wnpr.org. Let's go back to the phones. James is on the cell phone. He's out in Litchfield. Hi, James. You're on Where We Live.
Hello.
Hi.
Mr. Foley, I have a question regarding the long-term funding of state employees, long-term benefits, retirement packages, etc. I'm a physician. I work for correctional managed health care. I'm actually on my way to about two-thirds away from where I live across the state to take care of some inmates. Here's my question. One of the ways of cutting expenditure would be to renegotiate with unions to reduce long-term benefits for employees. However, many of the employees, myself included, joined in and made a long-term commitment on our part to work for 10, 20 years or more, knowing that we could make more money in the private sector, but we partially chose it based on the benefits that were laid out. And Connecticut underfunds those benefit programs much more so than other states do. So I'd like to know where you stand on fully funding long-term benefits, and do you see that as an area that could be cut or an obligation on the state to live up to its agreements?
James, thanks so much for the question. Tom Foley?
Yeah, James, good question. I admire what you're doing, and many people make the choice you made, which is to go into a state job where the benefits and security are more attractive than and more stable than the private sector in many cases. What's happened, though, is that 30 years ago, the current compensation for state jobs tended to be lower than what was available in the private sector, but job security and long-term benefits were better. And what's happened is that as the government has expanded and we've had many good years in the economy here in Connecticut, the current compensation of state workers has actually caught up and exceeded what's available in the private sector for equivalent jobs, and yet the benefits are all still there. Currently, the benefits for state workers are about 60% of payroll. That's versus about 30% in a very generous benefits package in a private sector company. So I agree that the commitment you made years ago, if it was years ago you made it, I think you said some 20 years ago maybe, that might have applied. The current compensation and the level of benefits have really outpaced what the old relationship used to be, and we need to bring it back more back in line. We simply can't afford what we're doing. Now, with respect to funding the long-term pension and other liabilities, our part of the problem we have is that we have overspent and underinvested. And for somebody who's a business person, they know the difference between those two types of spending. And we are doing a lot of current spending, and we're not investing enough in our transportation system, in our schools, and we're not making the investments to fulfill our long-term commitments for our pension funds and other liabilities to our state employees. So as governor, I would be looking to be making more of the types of investments you're talking about, and catching up and making sure that we have a strong balance sheet, that we're in financially good shape, which includes funding these long-term liabilities.
If you need to change long-term benefits of state workers in order to balance the books, how exactly do you go about those negotiations with state workers? What's your plan?
Well, we don't have any choice. We have to reduce the amount of money we're spending in state government. So the choice is, do you reduce benefits or do you lay people off? And I think when that choice is put to the unions and the state employees, most people would be in favor of bringing benefits more in line with what's available in the private sector than costing people jobs. And that's certainly the choice I hope that they will make, and that'll be a choice I have to make no matter who's governor.
Do you threaten a shutdown of government? Do you threaten to lay a bunch of people off? How do you actually go about these negotiations? We talked a bit about this last time you were here, and you suggested to me that you need to sometimes push these negotiations to the brink in order to get people to move. I'm just trying to get a sense of what your negotiating style would be like with the unions if you were governor.
Well, I'm a consensus builder, not a threatener. But I think that a governor needs to always keep that option open to make cutbacks in the state employees, because if the unions fail to agree and some other solution isn't available, that's your only choice, and you can't just sit there and keep spending the money when the money isn't, the revenues aren't there. So I would hope that this could be all worked out with an agreement. There was a consensus among all the involved parties, and my style isn't to threaten. But as I said on the show earlier, that you always have to keep that option available to you if the consensus building doesn't work, because it's the only way out of the problem.
Let's go to Eric in West Hartford. Hi, Eric. You're on Where We Live.
Yes, thank you for taking my call. My question for Mr. Foley is this. I wonder what you would intend to do about higher education in Connecticut, especially the state's university systems. You do talk about government spending, which I, of course, understand the need to cut it, but the University of Connecticut has been facing dwindling resources and tuition increases for quite some time now, and I wonder what you would intend to do for this very important asset of the state. Thank you.
Thanks, Eric. I'm very focused both on our schools and our university system. We need to make sure that we are offering good educations to everyone in Connecticut who wants one, and we need to make sure that those educations are providing the skills and backgrounds that people need to enter the workforce and be able to earn a living and support their family. So this is all tied together. We fortunately have a very good university system in Connecticut, but it's very expensive. And I believe that we can do more with less, which is what we're going to have to do throughout our state government. I am not in any way suggesting by reducing government spending that we're going to reduce the quality or level of certainly essential services, and I consider higher education an essential service. So we need to figure out how to do more with less. We, I think, need to look at how the governance of our university system works. I believe that the governor and the president, for example, of UConn, need more authority to control expenses. Right now, they don't have much authority, and it's kind of diluted. And when you have a situation like that, money tends to get spent that maybe doesn't always make sense. So I think we need more centralized control over the budget for UConn and other parts of our university system, and the governor needs to be able to have more to say about how much money is spent.
And very specifically, when you say we need to do more with less, what do we have to do? What's the less?
Well, the less is spending less money.
On what?
Yeah, all kinds of things. We have for duplication in government, better management of personnel to make sure that
in the university system.
Well, everywhere in government, but
yeah, I was just
certainly
speaking
in the
about the university system. Yeah.
Yeah.
What specifically in there needs to be targeted when we say we need to do more with less?
Well, I'm not that of speed on the actual budget for the university system and where the money's going, but I have the sense that I'm much more up to speed on the rest of the state budget. And I just know that there's a lot of money that gets wasted.
I just want to make sure that when we're talking about cutting back the university system, that we know indeed there are things that have to be cut specifically before we say we need to do more with less. That's all.
Well, most organizations can do, if they're better managed and there's more accountability, they can do the same, put out the same product, whether they're making widgets or they're providing some service or they're educating people with fewer people and fewer resources. It's an efficiency issue, and that's what good managers and good executives do. And I don't think that's being done right now. I don't think that kind of leadership is present either in Hartford or maybe at UConn.
You gave me a chance to transition to one of the things I wanted to ask about. We're talking with Tom Foley, Republican, running for governor, 860-275-7266. In the debate last night on NBC Connecticut, your challengers for this nomination were talking once again about the business that you run, which really does just what you said. It takes businesses that aren't running all that well, it finds ways to reorganize them and make them run better. What happens when that happens is oftentimes people lose their jobs along the way. And so Mike Fedeli and Oz Griebel have been hitting you pretty hard about the type of business you've run. When you run for governor as someone who understands business, but your business in large part has been taking apart companies and pulling them apart, trying to figure out how to make them run better, people do lose their jobs. How do you jibe this with job creation?
Not necessarily. Both of them have been criticizing one of my companies, criticizing me for one of my companies that long after I was no longer involved in the company, ended up closing a plant.
This is BIB, the Georgia company.
Yeah, yep. And they're in the textile business, and that whole industry moved offshore. So everybody, including all the competitors, ended up closing plants. But this happened long after I was no longer involved with the company, so it's a little disingenuous of them to be blaming me for that. But it isn't true that restructuring companies always means that people lose their jobs, because if you can find solutions where the companies can do more business without hiring additional employees or otherwise increasing their costs, that has the same effect. And that's what I always try to do. That's your first option. The last thing you want to do is lay people off. That's for any manager. That's the last way out of a bad situation.
Let's go to Art. Art is calling from New London. Go ahead, Art. You're on with Tom Foley.
Good morning, Tom Foley. I'd just like to call to repudiate your concept of lowering taxes for private industry as a way to improve the quality of lives of the citizens of Connecticut. We can see a glaring example recently with Pratt & Whitney, who made an agreement with their union members to stay in Connecticut, only to try to go around that agreement by moving the work to South Carolina. The court had to stop them. Thank God for the courts. Your idea that private industry is going to spend money just hasn't happened. They're hoarding money at this point. The only people who have spent money is stepped in is the government. But private industry wants low wages. They want no pensions, no industry. They want us to compete with the workers of China. And Connecticut is not interested in becoming South Carolina or Alabama or Mississippi or Louisiana. We need a Democratic governor this year. We've had 13 years of Republican governors in this state. The state budget has been cut, not the budget, but the state services have been cut continually. And just to listen to another Republican with the same old, stupid, vague response.
Hey, Art, I appreciate it. I'm going to let you let Tom Foley answer the first part of what you said. We'll try not to do so much of the name calling, perhaps.
Stop holding back, Art. Let us know what you really think.
Go ahead. We'll try to. Anyway,
hey, first of all, Art.
He makes a good point. He asked a good question up front, though. Yeah.
Art. Let me say one thing. I've never said that corporate taxes ought to be lowered in Connecticut. They're actually pretty competitive. So I said that taxes on working families need to be lowered. I'm talking about taxes on individuals. Corporate tax rates in Connecticut really are not a problem in terms of attracting businesses here, so I'm not suggesting that they need to be lowered. As for jobs leaving the state and competing with China, unfortunately, that is something that is part of the marketplace. There isn't much we can do about that. But what we do need to do is, because some of these jobs are just not going to be competitive in Connecticut long term. And what we need to do is we need to make sure that we're bringing in higher value added jobs than the ones that are leaving. And we're training people so that they can transition from the jobs that are leaving the state to jobs that can remain long-term in the state. And that's what I would do as governor, and I've identified 7 industries that have these high value-added jobs that should want to come to Connecticut and take advantage of the great assets we do have here, our great school system and university system, our highly skilled workforce, our high quality of life, and many other things that we can use to attract employers here if we can make this state a more business-friendly place and a place that's more accommodating and sympathetic to the needs of employers. We really need to do that. I can reach out to these people in this industry if we can get the front-end work done, make the state more business-friendly, and solve our budget deficit. No business is going to want to come here to Connecticut when we're facing a $3.5 billion budget deficit, and they'd be afraid that we'd be solving that budget deficit by raising taxes. So we need to solve all these problems. We can get the jobs here and replace the jobs that long-term we're probably going to lose. There's not much we can do about it.
Jim's in Danielson. Jim, you're on Where We Live. Go ahead.
I'm on?
Yeah, you're on. You're on the air with Tom Foley.
Hi, Mr. Foley. I was just worrying about property taxes. I was one of the victims of the recession and got laid off from a well-paying job. Now I'm an over-the-road driver, and I'm probably going to have to sell my house because I can't afford the property taxes up here anymore. And I get absolutely nothing for my taxes. No water, no sewer, no fire hydrants, no waste pickup, nothing. And they're taxing me out of Connecticut.
Jim, thank you very much. So, Tom Foley, how are you going to address the property tax system, which is, of course, something that a lot of people in Connecticut are worried about, not just people like Jim who are having struggles with money?
Yeah, Jim, good question. I'm very sorry to hear that you have lost your job. That's unfortunately happened to too many people here in Connecticut. We've lost over 100,000 jobs in 2 years. We're one of only 2 states that's had net job losses since 1989, and that's why we need new leadership and a new direction. Property taxes have gone up because the legislature has, again, put mandates on towns that limit their sources of revenue. And so one of their only sources of revenue now is property taxes. And in many communities, that puts too much of a burden on some families, and that certainly seems to be the situation in your case. So I think, again, if the state government can get off the backs of towns and let the towns figure out for themselves what their sources of revenue ought to be and provide them more flexibility, that many towns would not have as high property taxes as they have, and find other ways of raising revenues.
One more quick phone call before our break. Let's go to George. George is calling from Stores. Go ahead, you're on Where We Live.
Okay, shall I state my question?
You should, because you're on the air with Tom Foley right now. Go ahead, quickly.
Okay, the question of the funding of the university system cannot be resolved easily by just improving the efficiency of the way the university is set up and reducing the salaries, for instance, of the presidents, etc. What's more important is that the university is embedded in a society. And most of the graduates from our university system leave the state because they cannot find jobs in Connecticut. So what's needed is to provide an environment which makes it possible to have more industries using those graduates. And one of the ingredients is reducing the cost of electricity. The other ingredient is reducing the cost of housing.
And let's take these two. And George, and I appreciate your phone call. I just want to quickly get to Tom Foley before we have to get to a break. So he says reduce the cost of electricity, reduce the cost of housing. Those are 2 ways that you'll bring good businesses into Connecticut to employ young people who are getting out of college.
Well, the university system really isn't in charge of creating the opportunities in the state. That's the governor's job and the legislature's job, and that's what I will do. We need to bring jobs here that make young people feel that the best opportunities are here for them in Connecticut, and they don't have to move out of state for opportunities. So that's my job, not the job of the university system. The job of the university system is making sure that we're training our young people and giving them the education and skills that match the needs of the employers and the workforce. So that's a coordinating role, and yet I don't agree with George that we can't do more to reduce the cost of the university system. There are a lot of things that we can do to reduce the cost, and frankly, we have to, because if we don't, the only way to fund the university system is by raising tuitions for students, because the state doesn't have the money. So as I said, we need to do more with less. Certainly, a lot of the benefits and costs of state workers would apply to the faculty and other personnel at the university system. We can probably save money there, but I think we can also run them more efficiently. That's the only way we can avoid charging more in tuition, which I think reduces opportunities for young people to get the educations they need.
And again, in your plan to be governor, you'll get more specifics on what specifically, other than just cost of state workers and benefits, that sort of thing, what specifically you can do, because I think a lot of people in the university system are hearing you say that and go, well, what do we cut? I mean, we already have classrooms filled up with people. We already have people paying a lot of tuition stacked to the rafters. I'm teaching 400 kids in a class. We're bringing in person after person after person to try to raise the money to support the system. And people in the university system are going, what are you talking about? Where are these cuts supposed to come?
Well, right. But, in Connecticut, we still provide a much higher percentage of the budget for a university system than most states. We're paying about 50% of the cost, and states like California and others are paying far less. So we're doing more than most states are doing, and I think that's a good thing. But it simply, at some point, becomes unaffordable, and the only other place to go is with tuition or reducing expense. So it's, there are only three things to work with here.
And we'll get to some of his other questions, too, about reducing cost of electricity, reducing cost of housing. We've got to take a break. When we come back, there's some more things we want to tackle. Get more of your questions at 860-275-7266. We're also taking your emails, wherewelive@wnpr.org. This is Where We Live. I'm John Dankosky. We're continuing our Where We Vote series, talking with candidates for governor leading up to the August 10th primary. Tom Foley rejoins us. He's a Republican, former ambassador to Ireland. He's leading his GOP challengers for the nomination. He's trailing in a new Quinnipiac poll by around 11 points. Both Dan Malloy and Ned Lamont. That's in a general election race in this poll. He's got a healthy lead over Mike Fedeli. We're taking your calls at 860-275-7266 and emails wherewelive@wnpr.org. We got an email from Daryl in Madison, and it gets us back to our first conversation about campaign finance, and I think it's a really good question. So let me read it. It's a bit long, but it says, Mr. Foley says there's no evidence that John Rowland, former governor, gamed the system when we were talking about actual campaign funding. But in fact, he writes, there's an extensive body of evidence of pay-to-play in the old system that Mr. Foley describes fondly. One of the ways of getting inside Rowland's inner circle was to make large campaign contributions, in return for which business people and contractors got state contracts, state loans, and state appointments. Wasn't a nifty example, he writes, of this. Mr. Foley, who was appointed to co-chair a commission for which he had no credentials or qualifications, except as part of that inner circle of big donors. So a lot to tackle there. We'll save the second part for later, but first, let's get to the first part. He's suggesting that John Rowland, of course, did game the campaign system because it was a pay-for-play system. Do you agree?
I don't. I don't think that was ever proven. So, no, I don't agree with that. I can't really elaborate on it, but no, I don't think that was ever shown.
He didn't have people in his inner circle who were part of either his contributors, people who were close to him, who then got state contracts for work for which they were not qualified, or got appointments for which they were not qualified. That never happened in the Rowland administration, as far as you know. I
don't believe that was ever proven.
Now, some of the trouble that he got into, of course, with the contractors, some of the contractors who were implicated along with him, indeed, they were part of the inner circle. There was a pay-for-play mentality within the Rowland administration. Essentially, you'd get gigs because you knew John Rowland.
Well, I don't know that that's the case. It certainly wasn't the case with me. I don't do any contracting work, and to say that I got an appointment to a commission because I contributed to his campaign is absurd, and there was no pay or benefit to my being on a commission. It's actually work. It takes time. It was because I was interested in serving the public interest on a matter that I thought needed, where the state could do a better job, and that's why a lot of these commissions are formed. But I think that actually, I think one state contractor did make some improvements to a summer house or something that John had. It was pretty modest, but I don't think it was ever shown that any contracts by the state were awarded to that contractor as a result of that relationship. So it actually is a bit of a quirk in Connecticut law that a state contractor could build an addition on your house, for example, if you wanted. But if it isn't proven that something was given back for that, it's not illegal. And I don't think it was ever proven that any state contracts went to those people as a result of the favors that they gave John Rowland. So I don't think Darrell's right.
Should John Rowland have gone to jail?
You know, I'm not an expert on that part of the law or what happened or what the circumstances were. I just think it's unfortunate what happened.
The specific commission that Darrell was talking about that you were appointed to, this is the State Task Force on Child Custody Issues?
It was on divorce, custody, and children.
Why were you appointed to that commission?
Well, I had expressed an interest, for one, because I'd gone through a very difficult divorce, and I thought that the way the courts work in divorces, particularly where custody is being contested, it does not serve families as well as it could, and it could be improved. Again, I have said on the campaign trail that since I was a young person, I like fixing things, and when I see things that are broken, it's a challenge, and I want to fix them. And having been involved in a custody issue and in a divorce, and seeing how poorly the system responded, certainly to our needs, and I believe many of the needs of people in the similar situation here in Connecticut, I thought it could be improved. And so I was interested in serving on this commission when it was proposed.
Did you feel as though there was any conflict of interest at all, somebody who'd been through a divorce and been through some of these custody issues, serving and trying to change this system? It almost seems as though someone not involved, but maybe who's an expert in child issues, should really be taking charge of that.
No, more. I think more so somebody who has been through the system, who's been kind of a customer of the state system, would have a lot to contribute. This is to not have somebody like me on a commission like that, it would be worthless commission, because it would be all insiders, all talking to themselves. And I think my perspective as somebody who'd been through the system and experienced it as a family that was in need of the help of the court systems and family services, was the most valuable perspective on that commission.
But how did it not serve you, if you don't mind me asking? I mean, how specifically were you not served by the system that you were trying to change?
It takes too long. It's not responsive. I don't think that an adversarial system is an appropriate system for solving family matters to begin with. That's too ambitious for this commission. But we did a lot of things. We changed statutes. We got 16 criteria in there that to provide guidelines for judges in making custody decisions. It was a huge improvement. We got a 90-day time frame for getting a parenting schedule together, which is very much in the interest of children. Oftentimes, parents, when they separate, battle for months on end and sometimes years over even temporary custody orders and a schedule for children. That's terrible. And so I think that we made great improvements to the system, and there's still improvements can be made. I don't see any conflict at all. My divorce and the custody issues at the time I served on a committee were over, and so I had no personal interest in my own situation that could be served by serving on that commission, but I do think that somebody had been through and had an experience like I had, which was a difficult one. And divorce and custody are always going to be difficult. There's no system that's going to make it pleasant, but it could be a lot less unpleasant than it is currently in Connecticut.
This whole issue has come up, though, with the other candidates challenging you on some of these issues because your ex-wife had actually brought up this issue at the time. She didn't think you should be serving on this commission.
Yeah, but I certainly don't agree with her.
Yeah. I want to get to Mark in Southbury. And Mark, you're on with Tom Foley, who's running for governor.
Yes, good morning, gentlemen. Mr. Foley, I got a question in regards to, everybody's talking about cuts on the state and everything for the employees, but what's your position on reform of the welfare system, of making sure the people that are on it are the actual ones that need it, and that the people that are on illegally siphoning off the sweat of the taxpayer in Connecticut? I mean, is there any insight for you as far as any type of reform on that?
Yeah, I think there are opportunities. I think where we have maybe lost our way a little bit, and I'm not just talking about welfare, I'm talking about all entitlements, is that there are statutory guidelines for who qualifies for entitlements, and I think lots of times people who get into doling out these entitlements are basically advocates for the recipients of the entitlements, and if the government isn't careful and you don't have strong leadership at the top, the rules are get kind of loose, and a lot of people are receiving benefits who maybe statutorily aren't entitled to them. So one of the things we would want to make sure is that people who are only people who are entitled to receive benefits from the state get them, and that makes sure that we have enough money for the people who really need them.
Matt, you're on Where We Live. A quick question, please, and a quick answer from Tom Foley. Go ahead.
Sure, John. Thanks so much for taking my call and this opportunity to address some concerns with the ambassador's vision for the state. I'm with one of the unions in CBAC, the Coalition of Connecticut State Workers, and Ambassador, I'd like to challenge your notion that the budget can be balanced on the backs of our teachers, our police officers, our nurses, not to mention the students, seniors, and all of us who count on the services they provide. Just quickly, you say that moving workers from traditional pension plans, the kind that provide safe and secure retirements, to the kind of alternatives you've been promoting on the campaign trail, 401ks, which are really just savings accounts. The problem with that, Ambassador, is that's not just bad for seniors, that's bad for the whole economy. I'm sure you know that pension plans are more stable than these kinds of savings accounts. So quickly, Ambassador, my question is this approach really just designed to distract middle-class voters and convince them, more of them, to send their family savings to Wall Street? I mean, that's what brought us the Great Depression in the first place, Ambassador.
Yeah, well, certainly, Matt, I see things a little differently. I'm not saying that we're going to balance the budget on the backs of our state employees. That would be the actual cost of state employees is a relatively modest part of the budget. Most of the state budget are transfer payments, Medicaid and other benefits that are, and paid out to vendors for the state. So you cannot close the budget deficit on the backs of state employees and teachers. And I've never said so, and that's not part of my plan. I also am not saying. I think the other two Republican candidates have talked a lot about 401ks, which is a defined contribution plan as opposed to a defined benefit plan. I believe it is an option we should consider, but there's nothing wrong with defined benefit plans as long as they're affordable for the state. And so I have not been one who has said we have to go to a 401k, for example, but we do need to make sure that the benefit plans we do have are affordable for the state. And so I basically don't agree with your premise, and I think that we can make the cost reductions that we need to make, and we can do it in a way that's fair to people who are working for the state.
We just have 30 seconds left, and I've been with you twice now, and you've said that you can balance the state's big budget problem, $3 billion by cutting, not by raising new taxes. You win this office, and you end up being governor, and you find out that's not the case. What happens? Are you saying you're not ever going to raise taxes while you're governor?
Well, I've said I'm not going to solve the current budget deficit by raising taxes. You don't have to cut $3.5 billion. The $3.5 billion budget deficit is based on an economic forecast for the state, which I think is pessimistic. I think as governor, I can bring back jobs and get the economy going more quickly than they're forecasting in the budget. If we can get a healthy portion of those jobs that have been lost back, we can generate $1 billion to $1.5 billion of revenues.
Tom Foley is a Republican running for governor. Thanks for being here once again. I appreciate it.
Thank you, John. I enjoyed it.
This is Where We Live.